I left my wife of 28 years a single note in my house keys, and 6 months later, I watched her perfect wedding implode from 4,000 miles away. Everyone thought we had it all, but they had no idea what really happened behind closed doors. Here's how I exposed the truth without ever stepping foot in that vineyard. Welcome to Late Night Confession Stories. I'm your host. This is a place for the truths we only tell in the dark, the stories that stay buried until the rest of the world is asleep. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own life, you're in the right place. Before we dive into Raymond's full story, make sure to join our late night community by hitting that subscribe button. Now, let's go back to the night everything changed. My name is Raymond Cole, and for 28 years, I was a man living inside a beautifully constructed lie. If you saw me 6 months ago, you would have seen a man who had made it. I lived in a 4 million square foot sanctuary of glass and steel in one of the most prestigious zip codes in the country. I drove a car that cost more than most people's college educations, and my suits were tailored by men who didn't even put price tags on their work. But as I sit here now, in a small, salt-air apartment in Lisbon, I realize that for nearly 3 decades, I wasn't a husband or a father, I was a high-functioning piece of furniture. My wife, Catherine, was a woman who didn't just value appearances, she worshipped them. To her, a home wasn't a place to live, it was a stage. Every morning, I woke up in a bedroom that looked like a spread from Architectural Digest, and every morning, I was reminded of the rules. Do not wrinkle the duvet. Do not leave your watch on the nightstand. Do not breathe too loudly. If she was on a call with the country club board. I remember a specific Tuesday, about a year ago. I had just closed a grueling merger at the firm. I was exhausted, my head was throbbing, and all I wanted was to sit in my leather armchair with a glass of scotch. When I walked through the door, Catherine didn't ask how my day was. She didn't even look up from her iPad. Instead, she pointed at my feet. Raymond, those shoes were on the pavement. I just had the foyer stones polished with a diamond grit sealant. Take them off in the garage. I stood there, in my own house that I paid for with 80-hour workweeks, and I felt like a trespasser. I was the man who provided the Italian marble countertops, the hand-carved molding, and the climate-controlled wine cellar, but I was forbidden from actually enjoying them. Our marriage had become a series of performance reviews. The hedge needs trimming, Raymond. The Andersons just bought a summer house in the Hamptons, Raymond, why are we still settling for the Cape? You're gaining weight, Raymond, it doesn't look good for the photos at the autumn gala. I was a ghost in my own hallways. Even my children were part of the scenery. Olivia, my eldest, was 27 and had inherited my stubborn streak. She became an investigative journalist, and I think I know why. She spent her entire childhood watching her mother spin fantasies, and she became obsessed with digging up the truth. Jason, my 24-year-old son, went the other way. He became a junior investment banker, chasing the same hollow status and expensive watches that Catherine used to measure a person's worth. He was her golden boy, the one who still believed the performance was real. The breaking point didn't come with a shout. It came with a whisper from my own heart. It was a cold Thursday in November. I was in my home office, surrounded by leather-bound books I never had time to read, when a sudden, white-hot pressure slammed into my chest. It felt like an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs, trying to wring the life out of me. I collapsed onto the Persian rug, the one Catherine told me never to walk on with socks, and I remember thinking, at least the rug is soft. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 hours later. The room was sterile, white, and silent, except for the rhythmic, lonely beep of the heart monitor. I looked toward the window and saw Catherine. She was wearing a Chanel suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, looking like the picture of a grieving yet elegant wife. But she wasn't looking at me. She was typing furiously on her phone. Catherine? I croaked, my throat feeling like it was filled with glass. She turned, but there was no relief in her eyes. Only irritation. Oh, you're awake. Raymond, I've been on the phone with the gala committee for an hour. Do you have any idea how much work it is to reorganize a seating chart at the last minute? If you can't make it on Saturday, I'm going to have to go with your brother, and everyone will know something is wrong. They'll think we're having financial trouble if you're too sick to show up. She didn't ask if I was in pain. She didn't ask what the doctors said. She only cared that my heart attack was a branding issue. That was the moment the man known as Raymond Cole died. The man who cared about the marble and the gala was gone. Over the next 2 months, I became a master of quiet execution. While Catherine spent my money on new silk drapes and planning our 30th anniversary party, I was meeting with lawyers in the city. I quietly moved my personal assets into a family trust, naming Olivia as the sole trustee, knowing she was the only one with the integrity to protect it. I refinanced our properties, shifting the massive hidden debts Catherine had accumulated from her shopping addictions onto her own name. The night I left was the quietest night of my life. I waited until the house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and thick. I packed a single suitcase with clothes that didn't have designer labels. I walked into the kitchen, that pristine, cold kitchen, and took off my wedding ring. I placed it on the counter next to my house keys, and a single note tucked under her favorite porcelain coffee mug to it didn't say much. It didn't need to. It just said, "Everything's yours. I'm gone." I didn't look back at the $4 million museum as I backed out of the driveway. I had a one-way ticket to Lisbon and a heart that was finally starting to beat for itself. Raymond thought he was safe in Lisbon, but the past has a way of catching up. If you're enjoying this story so far, drop a hot beverage in the comments below. It helps the algorithm find more listeners like you. And if you've ever had to start over from scratch, let us know you aren't alone. Lisbon didn't just welcome me, it absorbed me. I moved into a small, sun-drenched apartment in the Alfama district, where the walls were covered in faded blue azulejo tiles and the air always smelled of grilled sardines and sea salt. For the first few weeks, I did nothing but sit. I sat at the Praca do Comercio watching the Tagus River flow toward the Atlantic, feeling the weight of 28 years slowly lift off my shoulders. In the United States, I was Raymond Cole, the man with the portfolio and the marble house. In Lisbon, I was just Senor Americano who liked his espresso strong and his mornings quiet. I had cut off all contact. My phone remained off, tucked away in the bottom of my suitcase like a dormant explosive. I wanted to see who I was when I wasn't being a provider or a prop. I started painting. I wasn't good, my hands were too used to clutching pens and steering wheels to be graceful with a brush, but I painted the way the light hit the yellow buildings at sunset. I was learning a new language, not just Portuguese, but the language of being alive without an audience. However, a man like me doesn't stay a ghost forever. After 4 months of silence, curiosity finally got the better of me. I turned on my phone in a small cafe while a fado singer's voice drifted through the cobblestone streets. The influx of messages was like a physical blow. Hundreds of texts from Catherine, ranging from frantic to furious to cold. She had discovered the debt I left behind. She had found out that the wealth she thought she owned was merely a lease on a life she could no longer afford, but it was a message from an old business associate, Richard Pelliter, that caught my eye. It was an invitation, not for me, but a forwarded digital announcement for a wedding. Catherine wasn't mourning the loss of our marriage. She had already replaced me. The groom was Kenneth Bradshaw. I knew the name. Everyone in the high-stakes investment world knew the name. Kenneth was 20 years younger than me, a man who lived his life in the fast lane of venture capital and flashy social media posts. He was exactly what Catherine wanted, a man who looked like success. The wedding was set for the Seven Hills Vineyard in Napa Valley. It was going to be the social event of the season, a rebirth for Catherine. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. I wasn't jealous. I was worried. Not for Catherine, she had made her bed, but for my children. I reached out to Olivia. When she answered the phone, there was no shouting. Just a long, heavy sigh of relief. "I knew you were in Europe, Dad," she whispered. "I tracked the trust fund movements. I just didn't know if you wanted to be found." "I needed to breathe, Olivia," I said. "But tell me about this Bradshaw character. He's too loud to be real." Olivia, the investigative journalist, didn't disappoint. She had already been digging. She told me that Kenneth Bradshaw was a financial architect who built buildings out of thin air. He was currently under a quiet investigation for a Ponzi-style investment scheme. He wasn't marrying Catherine for her beauty or her social standing, he was marrying her because he thought she still had the Cole fortune. He was a shark looking for a lifeboat, and Catherine was a woman looking for a captain. They were two people falling in love with masks, unaware that both of them were wearing one. "He's using Jason, too," Olivia added, her voice tightening. "He's got Jason bringing in young investors from the bank. If Kenneth goes down, Jason goes down with him. He's putting our brother in the line of fire to save his own skin." That was the moment my retirement ended. I realized that leaving the note and the key wasn't enough. I had escaped the museum, but I had left my children inside while the building was on fire. I couldn't go back, not as the man I used to be, but I could send a message I didn't want a legal battle. I didn't want a public shouting match. I wanted a revelation. I contacted Richard Pelliter again. Richard ran one of the most exclusive catering firms in Northern California, and he was handling the Seven Hills wedding. "Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I need you to add one name to the guest list. A man named Clark Witherby. And I need him to have a microphone." Clark Witherby was a legend in the world of forensic accounting. He was a man of immense gravity, a gray-haired lion who had spent 40 years dismantling the empires of frauds and liars. He wasn't a hitman, he was a truth-teller. If Kenneth Bradshaw was a house of cards, Clark Witherby was a hurricane. As the weeks led up to the wedding, I stayed in Lisbon, but my mind was in Napa. I coordinated with Olivia. She fed Clark the data, the offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the investments that didn't exist. We weren't planning a revenge. We were planning an exorcism. Catherine thought she was walking toward her greatest triumph. She thought she had traded a boring 54-year-old husband for a vibrant young billionaire. She was about to find out that she had traded solid ground for a sinkhole. And as I sat in my small Lisbon kitchen, looking at a photo of the Seven Hills Vineyard, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to pay the price for her delusions. The Seven Hills Vineyard in Napa Valley is the kind of place that exists solely to make people feel important. It's a landscape of rolling emerald hills, rows of vines that look like they've been groomed with a comb, and a central villa that resembles a Tuscan palace. On the day of Catherine's wedding to Kenneth Bradshaw, the air was thick with the scent of expensive lavender and the smug satisfaction of a crowd that valued net worth over character. It was a masterpiece of staging, exactly the kind of theater Catherine lived for. From 6,000 miles away, I could almost feel the tension in the air. Olivia was my eyes and ears on the ground. She checked in with me periodically, her voice hushed as she moved through the crowd of socialites and power brokers. She told me about the flower arrangements that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, the 5-tier cake dusted with actual gold leaf, and the way Kenneth Bradshaw moved through the guests like a politician, shaking hands with a predatory glint in his eye. "He looks like he's already spending your money, Dad," Olivia whispered into the phone. "And Catherine, she looks like she's won the lottery. She's glowing. She has no idea that the man she's standing next to is currently being circled by the SEC." But the most painful part was hearing about Jason. My son, my flesh and blood, was standing there as a groomsman. He was smiling, laughing with Kenneth's associates, oblivious to the fact that he was being used as a shield. Kenneth had spent the last few months grooming Jason, making him feel like a partner in his latest venture. In reality, Kenneth was just using Jason's last name, the Cole name, to give his fraudulent schemes a veneer of old money respectability. I sat in my darkened apartment in Lisbon, the only light coming from my laptop screen as I looked at the Vineyard's live social media tag. It was a digital sea of #perfectlife and #Napa wedding. I felt a surge of protective anger. I had left Catherine to her own devices, but I wouldn't let her vanity swallow my son. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the vineyard, the ceremony began. It was a lavish affair, filled with vows that spoke of eternal partnership and mutual growth. To the guests, it was a fairy tale. To me, watching the photos upload in real time, it was a tragedy in the making. Catherine looked radiant in a dress that probably cost as much as my Lisbon apartment. She looked like a woman who had finally found the upgrade she always felt she deserved. Then came the reception. This was where the performance was supposed to reach its crescendo. The wine flowed like water bottles that cost $500 apiece, and the laughter grew louder. Kenneth took the stage first, giving a boisterous speech about disrupting markets and building a new dynasty. He was charismatic, I'll give him that. He had that smooth, practiced confidence that makes people want to hand over their life savings, but it was time for the guest I had arranged. Richard Pelliter, true to his word, had cleared the path. Clark Witherby didn't look like a wedding guest. He wore a charcoal suit that was 20 years out of style and carried himself with the grim determination of a man about to perform surgery. He didn't belong in this world of silk and sparkles, and that was exactly why he was so dangerous. When Clark stood up to take the microphone, a hush fell over the room. People whispered, asking who the old man was. Catherine looked confused, her eyes darting to her wedding planner. Kenneth's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the mask. As he realized he didn't recognize this man, Clark tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the high-vaulted rafters of the villa. "Good evening," Clark began. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it that seemed to pull the oxygen out of the room. "My name is Clark Witherby. I'm not an old friend of the bride, and I'm certainly not an associate of the groom. I'm here because I was invited by a man who understands the difference between a foundation and a facade. A man who knows that when you build a house on sand, it doesn't matter how expensive the marble is." The silence in the room became absolute. I could imagine the look on Catherine's face, the slow transition from confusion to a cold, creeping dread. "Kenneth," Clark said, turning his gaze toward the groom. "You've spent a lot of time lately talking about investments. You've spent a lot of time telling people that their future is safe in your hands. But I spent my afternoon looking at the audit trails for the Seven Hills acquisition. I spent my afternoon looking at the signatures on the Bradshaw Cole trust documents. And I have to say, I've seen a lot of things in my 40 years of accounting. But I've rarely seen something quite this transparent." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine. "You see," Clark continued, his voice dropping to a low, conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "A wedding is a contract. And like any contract, if it's based on a fraudulent premise, it's void. You didn't marry Catherine for love, Kenneth. You married her because you thought the man who left her 6 months ago left the vault open. You didn't realize that Raymond Cole didn't just leave a note. He left a trap." In Lisbon, I closed my eyes. I could almost hear the sound of the first glass breaking. The performance was over. The truth had finally arrived at the party. The silence that followed Clark Witherby's words wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that precedes a landslide. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound in the Napa Valley villa was the soft clinking of a server's tray in the back of the room. Then, the explosion happened. Not of sound, but of motion. Kenneth Bradshaw's face shifted from a bronzed mask of success to a pale, sweating mess of panic. He lunged for the microphone, his voice cracking as he tried to laugh it off. This man, he's clearly a confused relative of Raymond's. Someone get him out of here. But Clark didn't budge. He stood there like a stone monument to the truth. Behind him, two men in dark suits, actual investigators Olivia had tipped off weeks prior, stepped out from the shadows of the catering entrance. Catherine stood frozen at the head of the table. The gold leaf on her wedding cake seemed to mock her as the room erupted into whispers. Fraud? The SEC? Who is that man? The socialites she had spent 28 years trying to impress were now pulling their phones out, not to take photos of the beautiful bride, but to capture the moment her life turned into a crime scene. Olivia told me later that the most heartbreaking part was watching Jason. My son, the junior banker who thought he had finally found a mentor, looked at Kenneth and then at the investigators. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He realized that every client he had brought to Kenneth, every friend he had vouched for, had been led into a slaughterhouse. He slumped into his chair, his head in his hands, as the tuxedo I'd imagined him wearing became a uniform of shame. The perfect wedding dissolved into a frantic exit. Guests scrambled for their cars, terrified that their own names might be linked to Kenneth's crumbling empire. By midnight, the Seven Hills Vineyard, the place that was supposed to crown Catherine as the Queen of Napa, was empty, save for the police, the lawyers, and a woman in a white dress sitting alone amidst the wreckage of a $10,000 floral arrangement. The aftermath was a slow-motion car crash. Kenneth Bradshaw was indicted within the month for a multi-million-dollar investment fraud. He hadn't just been stealing from strangers, he had been using Catherine's credit, her name, and the image of our old marriage to keep his Ponzi scheme afloat. Because I had restructured our assets into a trust managed by Olivia before I left, the money was safe, but the life Catherine knew was gone. The luxury cars were repossessed. The museum house was sold at a loss to cover the debt she had unknowingly co-signed for her billionaire groom. Back in Lisbon, I watched the news cycle from a distance. I felt a pang of sadness for the woman I once loved, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of closure. I hadn't destroyed her life, I had simply stopped holding up the walls of a house that was already rotting. A few weeks after the wedding, my phone rang. It was Jason. His voice was low, stripped of the bravado and the talk of market disruption. "Dad," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't see it." I wanted to believe the hype so badly that I didn't see the man standing right in front of me. "We all see what we want to see, Jason," I told him. "The difference is what you do after you realize you've been blind. Come to Lisbon. Leave the suits behind. Just come and be my son for a while." And he did. Both of them did. Today, my life is nothing like the museum I left behind. I still live in that small apartment in Alfama. The floors are uneven, and the plumbing is temperamental, but the air is clear. I met Isabel 3 months ago. She owns a dusty, crowded bookshop where the smell of old paper is more intoxicating than any expensive wine. With her, there is no performance. When we sit at a small café, we don't talk about our brand or our social standing. We talk about the book she's reading, the bad paintings I'm working on, and the way the Atlantic looks when the storm clouds roll in. Last week, Jason and his fiancée arrived. They aren't getting married in a vineyard with 5-tier gold-dusted cakes. They're getting married in a tiny, whitewashed chapel on the coast. There will be 12 guests, a local guitar player, and a dinner of fresh fish and bread. I sat with Jason yesterday, overlooking the river. He looked at me and asked, "Do you regret it, Dad? Leaving the way you did?" I looked at my hands, they were stained with blue paint, not the ink of a divorce lawyer. I thought about the note under the coffee mug and the brass key that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I don't regret leaving," I told him. "I only regret that I waited 28 years to realize that a life built on appearances is just a fancy way of being buried alive. I'm finally above ground, Jason. And the view is beautiful." As the sun sets over Lisbon, I realize that the confession isn't about the revenge at the wedding. It's about the fact that sometimes, the only way to save your family and yourself is to let the illusions burn so that you can finally see the truth in the light of the fire. I am Raymond Cole. I have no marble floors, no German SUVs, and no social standing. But for the first time in my life, I am exactly who I am supposed to be. Raymond Cole chose peace over a performance. He chose a foundation over a facade. But what about you? If you were in his shoes, would you have stayed for the kids, or would you have left that note on the counter? If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, it's the best way to support the channel. And if you're not ready for the night to end, click the video on your screen right now to hear about, I let my cheating wife think she was winning. Don't forget to turn on the bell icon so you never miss a confession. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.